Okay, welcome everybody to our Crosscut conversation, virtual style. My name's Brewer. Happy to be broadcasting live here from Crosscut's office in sunny Santa Monica, California, and sort of getting back into the swing of things. For those of you that weren't able to tune in a couple weeks ago, we had a panel around past crises, specifically the dot-com crash, as well as the global financial crisis. We were lucky enough to have Jake Weinbaum, Kara Nortman, Sky Dayton, and Chuck Davis with us. Jake imparted the concept around zero-based budgeting and really acting like and thinking that you are not going to be able to raise any additional capital in your business, and how are you going to make it for an extended period of time. Sky Dayton shared with us the concept around nailing a single product and doing that extremely well, and having that be your path through to eventual success. Chuck Davis was very smart to remind us that there is indeed a rainbow on the other side of every single crisis, and this current pandemic will be no exception, and it is a nice reminder for all of us that there is indeed a happier times ahead. And finally, Kara Nortman reminded us of a great rule, which is choose your partners very wisely, because it is indeed in times of need that you see the difference between great partners and not so great partners. So that was the episode a couple weeks ago. Today, we have 3 current operators, and our focus much more on what is actually happening today in this current climate. We're gonna cover things like, is it possible to recession-proof your business? How can you continue to build great products even with a subsized team or with limited amount of capital? And how do you keep company morale up at a time like this? We are very fortunate to have an all-star set of panelists today that I'm excited to introduce. I'll start with Cami Tellez. She's the CEO of Parade, based in New York City. It's a new underwear brand for women that's rewriting the American underwear story. She's raised $4.5 million from Lair Hippo and Greycroft. The other investors include the founders of Away, Casper, and Warby Parker. Prior to Parade, she invested at Rough Draft Ventures at Columbia University, and then dropped out to join the entrepreneurial world. We're thrilled to have Cami. Next up, we've got Claire Schmidt. Claire's the founder and CEO of AllVoices. Crosscut was lucky enough to lead the seed round last year into AllVoices. AllVoices is an anonymous reporting platform that enables employees to safely report harassment, bias, cultural issues, and other feedback directly to company leadership. Other investors include Spencer Rascoff, our next panelist, as well as Greycroft. And finally, our third panelist is Spencer Rascoff. Spencer is, of course, the co-founder of Zillow, of Hotwire, and most recently .LA here in Los Angeles, which has been fantastic to shine a light here in Los Angeles on everything that we have going on in the tech community. He also co-wrote and published a book, a New York Times bestseller, I might add, called Zillow Talk, Rewriting the Rules of Real Estate. So very fortunate to have all our panelists. With that, and to cover the topics, I will turn it over to you, Cami. We'll start in New York City. Tell us how it's going.
Brett, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. I was so excited when Spencer asked me because, you know, I have been thinking a lot really critically about how lucky Parade has been over the kind of the past 2 months. And, you know, so to give you guys a little bit more context on the company, I dropped out of Columbia about, you know, a year and a half ago to start Parade. We're a women's underwear company for women ages 18 to 30. And we're kind of a, you know, generation 2 e-commerce company, really thinking that generation 1 of e-commerce, you know, was focused on, you know, arbitrage on social media spend and, you know, high income, not rich yet people. And Parade is really thinking about e-commerce in a completely different way. And our kind of major competitors are really like Victoria's Secret and Aerie, which is part of American Eagle. And so, I mean, there were kind of a few kind of core topics that I was thinking about when, you know, thinking about how can entrepreneurs really kind of steer through this kind of core moment, and what are the ways in which, you know, you can really think about gaining ground. And so kind of to give you a little bit of background, kind of the 3 kind of topics that I was thinking about more specifically. The first is kind of thinking about macroeconomic trends and really thinking about how chaos is a ladder, and using that as kind of like a guiding, I think, like mantra for kind of how entrepreneurs should kind of go through the specific, period, and how they should kind of operate within, their broader markets. And the second is kind of really thinking about, gaining ground and how you can think about like kind of supply and demand based synergies. And I think the last one is really, how can we specifically as entrepreneurs, what is our responsibility to kind of our greater teams and our customers, in like leading with mission, vision, and values, and how kind of critical that is right now. And so does that sound good?
Yes.
Brett?
Great.
Cool. Awesome. So to give you guys a little bit of context, so roughly around 8 weeks ago when kind of quarantine started, Parade, we immediately saw kind of a giant like boost in sales. Like we immediately everything was going up and to the right, and we were like, oh, I have no idea what's going on. For context, we're a $9 product, so we're definitely a value brand. And we immediately, my co-founder and I started kind of like looking a little bit deeper, like trying to figure out like, okay, like media prices are going down, which is a phenomenal tailwind that we think we have right now. We kind of started to see, click-through rates were going up, replenishment was actually going up. All of these kind of core metrics and indicators for the business were kind of going up and to the right. And I think that for us, something that we, as an entrepreneur, you don't spend a lot of time market sizing, except for when you're really in the beginning of the business, kind of the first like initial stages, you're really thinking like, okay, how big is this opportunity? Where should we go after? Like, what are all these different kind of components of the market, and market dynamics? And so I think that like, for us, we really kind of took another stab at like sizing out the market. And what we realized was something that we had really missed in the beginning, which was that 80% of women's underwear is sold offline. And so Victoria's Secret and Aerie and kind of all of these kind of department store brands, like the majority of their volume is really pushed through these offline channels. And so we realized pretty immediately, like we are the best positioned kind of value brand in this kind of category. And not only that, but when thinking about like different parts of the market, like say Bridge, which is like slightly more expensive, like luxury is here, Bridge is here, mid-market is here, and budget is here. We were kind of straddling the two kind of different parts of the market that were budget and Bridge. And our price point, and really I think the critical thing in thinking about pricing, if you think that you're going to see significant reduction in volume, I think it's right now is really kind of a wonderful time to kind of look at that market that part of the market that's a little bit higher than yours, and understanding really how you can go upstream and lock in supply. And so for us, I think pretty immediately we realized, we have an opportunity to go after the women who would have been spending $20 on underwear, who would have been spending $25 on underwear. But now the fact that we're in a recession means that all of a sudden those people are now thinking, oh, a $9 underwear brand, like that makes sense to me. And so I think that for us, it was really kind of, I think, interesting and critical to kind of spend some time thinking about all these, distinct parts of the market, and really thinking about, I can speak to this more in a bit, kind of about marketing and messaging, but about what are the pieces that you can kind of, bite off, and what is now suddenly more achievable. Because I think the thing is that, like, back to my point about chaos being a ladder, and I think our job as entrepreneurs, is to find tailwinds when everyone else is like seeing headwinds, and really to understand where can you, where have you kind of reached, where can you reach new efficiency kind of in your acquisition strategy. And so I think for us, I think that was, a pretty immediate gain that, ended up leading to, we just actually closed a round of capital, because we went back to our investors and said, hey, all of a sudden, it's so much easier for us to win this market. And really thinking about the macroeconomic trends for us was, in apparel more broadly, and a lot of e-commerce, like a lot of the major incumbents are going to be, really suffering from the perspective of, like their Victoria's Secret's cutting inventory for the next 12 months, they're going to have to shut down stores, a lot of our competitors are, furloughing their employees. And so I think that the macroeconomic trends for us gave us kind of a why as to like why we needed more capital, and allowed us to kind of, go back and really build a business case that we kind of put together over like 30 days. And I think that I would implore you guys all to think about like market at large, thinking about price points. And I think entrepreneurs don't think enough about price. And I think price is like the only thing that matters, especially right now in a recession. And spending a lot of time kind of we spent some time building like some grids on price, and kind of looking at kind of like a 2x2, and thinking about, is your customer someone who's more likely to spend, less likely to spend in a recession? and where should you go next. But I think building a business case and really kind of closely tracking a lot of these core indicators of business performance can allow you to really understand, like, are we in the right market? Like, do we still have product market fit? Because I think that's the question a lot of entrepreneurs are asking themselves right now. And for us, basically, it allowed our product market fit to actually go deeper into kind of a broader part of the market, which I thought was, which I think is super kind of interesting and something that that a lot of people, a lot of founders, I don't think are necessarily thinking about right now. I think that for us, the question of capital efficiency is, I think, a really important one, and thinking about a lot of, I emailed Haley before this meeting, this webinar, and I said, what percentage of the people here are VCs and what percentage of them are founders? Because I'll say something different if most of them are VCs, but the majority, like, all of VCs will tell you to cut your like OpEx like 40% and like find 18 months of runway. We did that, we cut our OpEx a bunch, and we were really easy, like we were able to turn on like first order profitability pretty easily, kind of just at a flip of a switch, because we had that option to do that. I think that like the important thing for founders to recognize is that VCs, whenever they're speaking to you during a downturn, they're not looking at you as a founder or as you as like, your company. They're really looking at their entire portfolio, and they're managing risk across everyone. And so you need to make decisions really based on your business and like based on, macroeconomic trends you're seeing and what you kind of the operating leverage that you think that your company can have during this period. And so I think that like, like, as I said before, like chaos is a ladder. And so I think a lot of people are going to be playing defense. And I think that this is a really kind of opportune time, for companies to really figure out, like, is this actually a time for us to double down and grow? And they're non-obvious companies, right? Like companies that don't sell like, toilet paper and, hand sanitizer, that I think are really well positioned right now, that are kind of seeing some second order effects. And so I think for us, like the most important thing is like, I spent a lot of time yesterday on the phone with Andy Dunn from Bonobos, and so I'm 22. I dropped out of Columbia a year ago to start this, as I said earlier. And so I've never lived through a recession. I've never worked in a recession. And so spent a lot of time talking to, people who have, and really understanding like, different parts of the market. And I was talking to Andy Dunn yesterday from Bonobos, who's also an investor in Parade, and just kind of thinking about like, really, I think the most important thing for founders to be focused on is kind of not just your OpEx, but actually your like percentage operating loss. I mean, if you are a company that's not profitable, and actually thinking about like, how can you get that closer and closer to zero during this time, and get kind of, both of you kind of thinking about that kind of like cash, like, that cash curve and to profitability. How can you get that amount of cash needed to get to profitability, like a little bit, lower kind of, with each month that you're in market. I think for us, like, if you're gonna, kind of, take kind of like a nuclear bomb to your entire kind of marketing spend, I think that for us, like a really important thing was thinking about what are the most efficient channels, even if they're nascent channels. So for us, Parade is a brand that's, more than 55% organic. And, we still do paid advertising, like everyone else, but for us, a really nascent early channel was community. And the same way kind of Glossier and Majuri and kind of some of these community first brands are thinking about it. And so what we decided to do is, instead of just continuing to burn money on Facebook advertising, we were like, how do we take this money, invest it on our engineering team to automate processes and really double down on our kind of, our ability to scale this program that ultimately is evergreen, right? And like, we don't lose money on community. We actually, it's like our highest ROAS program. And so over the past few weeks, we've been able to kind of turn what used to be, a majority kind of like, paid budget into actually kind of an evergreen kind of engine. And so I think that there's a lot of kind of like critical thinking to be done around kind of marketing budgets and how people are spending things that, we used to spend a lot of money on out of home, on shoots, on all these kinds of different pieces that I think are necessary to building a bulletproof brand that people really care about. But, there's an opportunity right now to, I think, to double down on some of these earlier kind of channels that are emerging for you, that you kind of see opportunity in, which I think has been really kind of helpful for us. I think the other kind of component of gaining ground for us has definitely been, thinking about demand side imbalances for us. And, as an apparel company, right now has been actually an incredible time. We're one of the only companies that's doubling down on our purchase orders and actually buying more inventory versus less. And so we've been able to kind of go up our supply chain, and at every part of it actually, reduce costs like roughly, between 15 and like 30%. And the thinking there was really like, if that private valuations are down 30% and, the market's like down way more than that, everything should be cheaper for you. Like as an entrepreneur, like every single part of your kind of margin profile of like, your costs with, your non-fixed costs should be cheaper. And so for us, we've been able to kind of double down and get better terms with our factories. We've been able to kind of place bigger purchase orders in a shorter amount of time. A lot of these kinds of efficiencies that weren't here initially kind of have all of a sudden kind of come to be. And I think that it really comes down to, to being well positioned at that time. How much time do I have left, Brett?
That's you wrap it up, I guess, but I
Cool.
got
Okay.
you're doing
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think that the last piece that I kind of wanted to talk about, which I think has been, we kind of, when we first, when kind of everything first started with coronavirus, actually my co-founder got sick. And so that was really scary for all of us. And, we're thinking really critically about, what I always say to my co-founder is like, as founders, you're kind of like, you have to think about your employees. Like, have you ever been like camping with your family in the woods as a kid? And then you're like, this is so scary. And like, but my parents know where we are and they know where we're going. And like, really critically thinking about like, you are that person guiding these people. Like no one who's worked for me has ever worked at a startup before. And so, it's really important to think about like, you are the kind of the mystic that's guiding them. And I think it's a really important time to double down on mission, vision, and values for us. And I think that like, a core part of gaining ground is like building a super high performance team. And like, you have to, I think more now more than ever, like my employees are actually really excited to work weekends because they don't want to be with their families. And also like, I think that, sticking to those one-on-ones, spending a lot of time kind of talking with them and just listening and like pure empathy, like really like, I saw this great tweet a few days ago that was like, people aren't working from home. They're like trying to work during a crisis from home. And really treating kind of all interactions and also kind of like all feelings that every single person in your team, like always just like ask yourself and the people kind of in those interactions, like, what could that other person be thinking right now? What could they be going through? And I've actually found like every single time that, something happens within the company that's, less than optimal with culture, it's been like actually because of someone's family is sick or whatever. I think the other really important thing in culture is like celebrating small wins. Like about a month ago, Parade crossed $1 million in top line, and we still like sent everyone champagne, like the cheapest champagne possible. But we were like, we have to celebrate this. Like everyone on the team, is really, has kind of worked super hard for this moment. And we reported like 2 of our best months ever, and we had like 2x our best sales day recently. And I think that it's like celebrating the small wins. And like, if you had told me 2 months ago that I was going to be on Zoom happy hours, I would have been like, absolutely not. Like, that's so lame. But I'm thrilled to be there because like my employees are thrilled to be there. And like, I think it really, really matters to them. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the, and community. We've also spent a lot of time with, we have a community of like 600 ambassadors. We've done like Zoom happy hours with them and everything, but thinking about community and thinking about the role of kind of the entrepreneur as being kind of a connective tissue between kind of, the market forces at large, your employees, and kind of, what are they thinking about and what are your customers thinking about, and being able to kind of hold space for all of those different dynamics and lead with a ton of empathy, I think would be my final note.
Yeah. Awesome.
But anyways, sorry. Thank you for listening to ramble for a little bit too long, but I'll hand it back to Brett.
You got it. Yeah. Thank you, Cami. There's a lot of good takeaways in there and a lot of good content. One of the biggest overarching ones to me is there's not a single playbook. So the comments you mentioned, which is true, venture capitalists all tend to think very similarly. And
yeah.
The 40% cut and extend your runway to 18 months, that just didn't apply to your business, right?
Yeah.
You as the CEO and the founder have to be strong enough and smart enough to realize that as you did, and you made the case to actually raise more capital and to take advantage of this climate. And then the other thing is, it's an old saying I love to say, which is take advantage of your advantages. In this case, your advantage, one of your advantages are as you said, you're actually one of the few entities that's doubling the size of their purchase order, that's actually continuing to buy more and more. You have more leverage in that market than you did 6 months ago, and correctly so. You're taking advantage of it and increasing your margin by paying a little bit less for X, Y, and Z. So thank you for sharing that. We'll now bring it back to the West Coast, and I'll turn it over to Claire, who will walk us through her story at AllVoices and how she's doing. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Brett. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here with you all. So I've also obviously been thinking a lot about this topic and these topics. Recession-proofing your business is something that I've thought about a little bit. Just because, you know, we have been in this incredibly strong macroeconomic environment for so long. And I think, you know, I'm 36, so I actually was working during the 2008 recession, but I was actually working in a sector that was really untouched by it. I was doing actually operations consulting for the wonderful company. And what that was about was essentially finding efficiencies within all of their portfolio companies, businesses, from an operations perspective. So looking at waste, figuring out where there were waste in different systems and processes, and then cutting that out. And that was at Fiji Water, Palm Wonderful, what else? Everybody's Nuts, Cuties. They have a bunch of like health and wellness brands. So it was really interesting because ever since that, which was 12 years ago, all of those lessons have been really imprinted in my mind around how to find efficiencies in whatever you're doing and how to make sure that you're not creating a lot of waste in the systems that you build. And I think that serves you both during a recession and also not. So one thing I was going to share is that I started AllVoices in 2017. And I raised $1 million seed round, which Spencer was also in that round. Thank you, Spencer. And so started with $1 million, closed our second round, which was like a proper seed round with Crosscut leading at the end of 2019. And so we did a lot in over that 2-year period, actually more than 2 years, like 2.5-year period. And we did all of that with $1 million. And so, you know, some people might say that's a lot of money, but for what we did, which was building like an enterprise grade software product, bringing on 50 customers, including, you know, major public companies, like Instacart is not a public company, but large companies like Instacart, GoPro, Zillow is actually a customer. And so we had to think very clearly, very early on about how to operate in a lean way and how to get as much done as possible for as little money as possible. And oftentimes that requires getting really creative. It means that people have to wear multiple hats. It means that you try to figure out the best way to do something before you do it so that you don't create waste in the sort of engineering process. And so getting lots of like upfront user feedback and customer feedback and stuff like that. So we already have this lean mindset, which is great. And I think the number one thing that founders can do right now to sort of recession-proof their business falls into 2 categories. Obviously, the first category is looking at expenses and figuring out what you're spending your money on, and trying to make sure that it's efficient as possible. And then the other side of it is obviously making sure that you're providing something that customers need and not just want. So we're a B2B business. We're selling into the enterprise. Like I mentioned, we have about 50 customers. Each one of those customers is dealing with this pandemic too, right? And so this is not just about me making sure that I really like our product and that things are going great from my perspective. But we actually had to take a step back and say, okay, our product, which enables employees to speak up, report issues, provide feedback to leadership, that is still really valuable and it still matters during this time. So that's great. But what about all of our customers? What about their businesses and how are they being affected by the pandemic today and also like 6 months from now. So we actually created sort of a matrix that was like a triage matrix for us so that we could look at every single customer when they were going to be renewing their contract, because we have annual contracts, what challenges we think they're facing because of the pandemic, you know, both now and potentially in the future. And then how can we figure out how to provide something that's of value to them now to make sure that they're getting as much value as possible out of the tool, so that when the time comes for them to decide whether to renew, they're thinking about all the things that we've done for them recently that have been really valuable to them. And not in like a weird, sneaky way, like we actually want to be of value to them. So that's just an exercise we may not have done in the past because we're just sort of rolling along, you know, selling as much as we can and, you know, doing some customer success, but not actively getting into the shoes of our customers and saying, what are they facing right now? How could their business be affected, or how has it already been affected by what's been going on around the world? And I think that was a really great exercise, and it's probably something that will stick with us actually long after this is over, you know, whenever that might be, because I think it's a good sort of exercise in empathy. So that's one thing. And then obviously on the other side, it's like looking at our own expenses, making sure that everything we're spending money on is something that we're using and finding value in, which, you know, we have seen actually very little in terms of our ability to cut costs, but it's just because we've been running lean for so long. And actually because of the timing when we fundraised, we hadn't had the ability to ramp up our expenses in the way that we had planned to. So, so that's a good thing. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on is, I think so many people have been talking about like, how can you cut costs and where can you cut them? And that is important to think through, but also now, what we're seeing is that the usage of our platform has actually doubled between like February and March. And what that tells me is that there is a lot of anxiety out there right now, that employees are looking for ways to speak up about all the things that they're facing that, you know, many of which are new, many of which none of us have ever dealt with in our lifetimes. A lot of the things we're hearing is that employees are reporting challenges with transitioning to remote work, reporting questions or concerns about safety issues. Maybe there are people who actually are having to go, you know, are being categorized as essential workers and they're having to go out into the world and maybe they don't feel like they have the equipment that they need. And I think we're seeing how actually poorly this can go when, you know, they're not heard and when their needs aren't met, right? And so how can employers and HR leadership get ahead of these types of concerns by basically giving people a way to speak up? And I think that's something that is incredibly important even during a recession, is you have to think about your employees' mindset, what they're going through right now. Maybe they're worried about losing their jobs. Maybe they're worried about the health of the company. So what are some ways that you can sort of like solicit feedback from them on an ongoing basis, and then also kind of push your questions to them as well? So another thing we did is we built a survey specifically around coronavirus in partnership with one of our advisors. We populated that into all of our customers' dashboards so they could use it whenever they wanted. We didn't charge them for it. We didn't try to use it as a way to like upsell them. We just honestly wanted them to be able to send a quick email and get a bunch of input from their employees on how they're feeling and any challenges they might be facing. And that does two things. One, it shows that you care about your employees. And two, it actually tells you what their needs are. And then once you know what their needs are, you can actually take the proper action. But if you aren't hearing from them, especially because they might all be working from home right now and you're not able to just like swing by their desk and talk to them or chat with them over you know, catered lunch, this is an alternate way to do that. So I think investing in your employees, understanding their needs, and, you know, we actually did this ourselves. We have 7 employees. I actually sent the survey to our 7 employees. So we have to walk the walk. We can't just talk about all the great things to do for culture. So I would say that's that's kind of the high level on the questions that you want.
Awesome. Yeah, there's as you know, you've built an amazing product, and as you pointed out, your product is more valuable now than it ever was, right? Which is the displaced workforce. I love you bringing up examples of things to do right now that aren't cost cutting. Cost cutting is relatively straightforward. I love the example of think about the way your customers are being affected and how you can provide more value to them during this particular time period, right? That's something that every single startup can be thinking about, apply to their own business, to their customer base, and benefit from it. So thank you for that. All right, we'll now go, at least on my upper left screen, to Spencer Rascoff, and we'll turn it over to Spence.
Thanks, Brett. So I totally agree with everything that's been said. Cami in particular gave some good examples of how they're kind of leaning in and investing into the downturn. You know, this is something that I'm trying to figure out with respect to .LA. I mean, .LA raised a $4 million seed round about six-ish months ago. And going into coronavirus, we had about 8 employees, and we had just launched a media site covering LA tech. And we were faced with a decision: do we continue to hire the podcasting team and the social media team to push out our media assets, our editorial coverage into different channels? And on the one hand, I was like, look, we're ahead of plan. We weren't supposed to have any revenue now anyway. You know, we weren't supposed to have any revenue for a year plus, and traffic is far exceeding plan. So things are going really well. Let's keep investing and sort of lean into it. And that's what we decided to do. But I don't know about you, Cami, but I almost sort of felt guilty going into that decision because like everyone's cutting all around, and you know VCs are encouraging you to cut, and you want to make sure you have a large enough runway, and I want to be a good steward of capital. But it feels like in .LA's particular weird circumstance, it felt like the right thing to do. So I'll contrast that with 2 other experiences that I have, which were not as pretty. So I started Hotwire in 1999 and Zillow in 2006. And 2 years after both of those foundings, we hit a wall because of macro. So in the case of Hotwire in 2001, 2 years after founding, we had 9/11. In the case of Zillow in 2008, 2 years after founding, we had the financial crisis. So 9/11 was a travel crisis. 2008 was a real estate crisis. So, you know, my 2 startups were kind of the epicenter of those 2 global macro crises about 2 years after founding. It was a weirdly similar story in both cases. We went from about 200 employees to about 150. Hotwire did a down round. Zillow managed to avoid doing a down round, which made all the difference in terms of kind of value creation. But I learned a lot going through those 2 downturns of those 2 companies. I learned, first of all, that you do want to cut enough, as it sounds like Jake Weinbaum talked about last time. You want to cut enough to control your own destiny, to try to get to break even if possible, to not be dependent on outside capital. You want to try to cut deeply enough that hopefully you only have to cut once. You know, the worst thing, the thing that kills a company culture is the second and third round of layoffs and cuts. So you really want to try to avoid that.
Which Spencer, as you know, hard to do. And Chuck Davis on the last thing, he did 5 cuts.
Yeah, so very hard to do, especially with coronavirus, because nobody knows how long it's going to last, right? So, you know, in a normal recession, you just cut deeper than you think you need to, and you'll be fine. Here, you know, there's really no way to know. So that's the difference on the downside in this case. The difference on the upside is nobody will blame you for cutting anything right now. You know, in a normal downturn for a company, when a company retrenches, a company does layoffs, a company does down round, whatever, you know, the CEO feels this awful guilt. It's because I got us out over our skis. We grew too fast, and that's on me. You know, here, if you cut 20% or 25% or 30%, you know, employees aren't going to, no blame will accrue to you as the founder, you know, given that it was totally out of your control. So that's the plus on this one. The most important thing is actually not really the cuts. It's, well, let's talk very briefly about how to do those. I think Cami and Claire, you both mentioned the importance of empathy through that. We've seen the companies that have stubbed their toes the last couple of weeks are the ones that have done it very robotically, you know, all due respect to lawyers, sort of in an overly lawyer-esque way, and, you know, not with enough empathy and not enough human element. So that's critical. But then the most important thing is what happens the next day and how do you lead going forward? I think, Claire, you mentioned the importance of kind of connecting with your customers and sort of recommitting to the personas that you built the product for. So I think that's really important. It's standing up in front of the company and saying, look, this is why you all joined the company. It sucked that we had those layoffs. We treated those people as fairly as we could. We're helping them out. We're putting their LinkedIn profiles out in a spreadsheet. Our VCs are helping get the word out. We extended the exercise period of their options. You know, we gave them fair severance. But now let's move on together. And here's why we started this company. Here's the mission. Here's why you're here. Here's the problem we're trying to solve for our personas, business and consumer. And let's, you know, lock arms and recommit to that mission and recommit to the that we're building. And that's where leadership shows. And that's where great companies are built. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to wherever you want the conversation to go, Brett. In both those cases, this is the silver lining. In Hotwire in 2008, in Zillow 2008, Hotwire 2001, what happened over the next 6 months was this explosion of creativity and innovation and efficiency and productivity and just awesomeness as people were motivated and inspired and acted with urgency. And all of a sudden, you know, things that used to take 6 weeks to make a decision were getting done in 60 minutes. There were figuratively and literally fewer people in the room to make these decisions, and everyone felt a sense of shared ownership. And it was, you know, if you asked employees at either of those companies, they would both say that one of the best things that ever happened to those companies was the downturn and the kind of retrenchment and focus that it brought to the companies as a result.
Awesome. Well said, Spence. And I think the unfortunate, there's some exceptions, and we have a couple on the call today, but for the most part, during a recession, you do have to cut. The way Spencer outlined, doing a cut with empathy and really caring about those employees and caring where they end up, and then re-engaging the workforce around the mission is Harvard Business School case study. So very well said, Spencer. Thank you everyone for submitting questions. We've got a lot of questions and 7 to 10 minutes left, so I'll just fire out a few and our panelists will answer them as they see fit. As early stage founders, what are some hacks that you've discovered to help cut costs, boost morale, and generally operate your business? So sort of an overall question, but any hacks that you've come across in the last few months, or Spencer, over a longer period of time?
I think, you know, it's not about cutting costs. It's about connecting with your employees. I think that even in good times, employees connect with the authenticity of leadership. And on the one hand, that can be harder to convey, you know, through video. On the other hand, actually, it's a lot easier. You know, opening up meetings with, let's talk about how everyone's doing at home. You know, how are your kids doing with homeschooling? How are your pets handling the fact that you're home all the time now? Like that level of just authenticity that you're showing to your employees, I think goes a long way to building personal connection and actually drives a higher level of engagement of employees and throughput. Sorry, that sounds so clinical and sort of Machiavellian, but
and by the way, if you want to get to know Spencer in 30 seconds, he's the type of CEO leader that asks you about how your pets are doing at home, you being home so much. He's a very thoughtful CEO.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that, Spencer. I think that's great. And sometimes it can be awkward, like people aren't used to sharing so much about their personal lives in a work setting. And so often it's on the leader to like lead the way in doing that and opening up themselves, which I think you were alluding to. And also there's little like games you can do, like icebreakers, or we play Rosebud Thorn every Friday, which is just like a nice way to go out into the weekend. And it's about what's going on with you personally, what's going on with you at work, just whatever. It's like your favorite thing that happened the past week, your hope for the future, and something hard. So I think stuff like that can just kind of like get people's juices flowing and get them to open up about things that are tough for them. And then you have that information, you get to act on that, like I said before. So, you know, one woman on our team, actually 2 people on our team have had to cancel their weddings. One of them, their wedding was supposed to be this past Saturday. So we sent her a little gift. Like there's stuff you can do once you know what's going on with people. But if you don't know, you can't do anything about it.
Right.
Totally.
Well, let's move on. We got lots of questions in short amount of time. This is a very thoughtful one, I think. How can businesses sell products and services while being sensitive to the macro environment and specifically the rise in unemployment?
Yeah, I think that was something that was really hard for us at the very beginning because we're a drops company. So we drop, products every 2 weeks. And we originally had, this was kind of a little bit like internal, like legendary story. We had a spring break collection that was due to launch like right 2 weeks after this started. We were actually caught in LA shooting it when we were, when coronavirus started. And we literally had to pivot the entire collection to be Dreaming of Summer. And it was actually our, it got like 10 press hits. Like it was our most written about collection. It was really turning, kind of what is like the kind of embodiment of Parade and the mission, vision, values. Like, what is it? It all has to, I think the key thing here, like I can talk about how it applies to my business, but the key thing is that it has to really authentically ladder back to your mission, vision, values, and how you're thinking about like launching product has to be a reflection of what kind of Spencer was saying about the personas and what you're committing to kind of making those, like what in their lives are you making better, and genuinely thinking like, sitting down with your employees. I think right now is such a time for radical creativity and just like, what actually do we have to offer the world right now? And for us, it was like one of our styles, which is one of our best selling styles, is called the boy short, and people were kept like sending to our CX team like, oh, I wear this like like during Zoom meetings, and like I'm wearing a normal shirt, but I'm actually wearing underwear on the bottom. And like actually thinking about repositioning your product like line as like, what are people actually wearing right now? And like, what are people actually, like what do people want? And so I think that it has to ladder back to brand at kind of at the very core.
Cool, great answer. We'll leave it at that. Thinking about the world in 2021 and beyond, what are some of the trends you think will stick after this global pandemic has passed?
I think there'll be a permanent reduction in business travel. I think a lot of the day trips that I used to do to New York, take a red eye from the West Coast, 3 hours of meetings and head back, or day trips to San Francisco, those will be done by video conference. And if that's true, that has huge implications for the travel industry and hotel industry in particular, rental cars, et cetera. That's one change. Another one is if people are telecommuting 2 or 3 days a week, they are only in the office say 3 days a week, not 5. And if there are autonomous cars in 5 years, that will mean a much more suburban sprawl type reality, which has pretty big impacts on the residential real estate industry. People are going to be okay living an hour away from a city center in order to get more space, because they're only commuting that hour, say 2 days a week. And when they do, they're in a self-driving car. So it's productive commute time. So that could really change the future of real estate if those two trends stick.
Totally.
I think also we're just seeing how, like what Spencer was saying about business travel, I think we're also just seeing how many, meetings could have been a call, could have been a Zoom. So probably a tendency toward that, like continuing even after the fact, because especially in LA, if you have a meeting, you have to drive an hour to get to that meeting, drive an hour back, like that's 3 hours of your day. So I think it will start to become more normalized to just say, I'd love to do it. How about we do it over Zoom?
Yeah. Right.
Yep. Totally.
All right, so our final question will end with something light that keeps coming up, which is to end with a couple of positives that have come out in your personal life of just being on lockdown for 50 or 60 days now. I'll just knock mine out quickly. Certainly being with the family this much is great. There's some things that are not great, but for the most part, it's an amazing blessing and been hilarious. I've also really enjoyed the deep dive with our various portfolio CEOs. And it's just, typically you just don't have this much time. There's not as many decisions being made. So I've enjoyed that. And then the last one I'll say, and I know this is on the edge of, I'm not sure it's legal or not, but as a family, we've done a lot of road trips around California. I am a huge believer. Anyone that knows me knows I love California. I love everything about it. The road tripping up and down California coast during COVID has been exceptional. One, due to there's not that much traffic, but two, it's a really amazing time of year. So I highly recommend it for anyone out on the West Coast or wherever you are. Just getting out and getting into nature and soaking it all up has been really amazing. Panelists?
I'll go. I wrote that one down, Brett, for myself, because that's a great idea. The road tripping. So my family lives in Portland, Oregon, both my brothers and my parents and everybody, my aunt, and they have a weekly family dinner. And sometimes I've tried to like Zoom in or like FaceTime in, and everyone's kind of like, go away. Like, we're trying to enjoy our time here. So, cause it's, you know, it's weird when it's a mixed group. So now everyone's on Zoom. And so I get to join those dinners, which has been awesome. And it's just like a nice Sunday every single week. My other thing is, I feel like we're all in like kind of digital overload during the day. So I've noticed myself doing a lot more like walks at night with my husband, and doing things that are like more, you know, tactile. Like we've been playing chess and backgammon. So hopefully those will all stick even after this is over.
Who wins in your guys' chess matches?
Me. He's always like, are you sure you want to do that? And I'm like, I think, unless I'm missing something. And then he ends up losing every time.
I can go next. I felt like so tremendously lucky, obviously, I think, to reconnect with family because my siblings are much younger than me. They're 10 and 14. And so getting a chance to be with them every day has been kind of phenomenal. I think that for me, it's also been just a great time to actually, Brett, I think what you said about like reconnecting with your portfolio companies, I think building a really close relationship with our like lead investors, which is something that like you sometimes don't do because you're like, oh, everything's going great. Like, we don't need to talk. And like, I think that getting to actually build human relationships with those people, and Spencer's been a great investor so far, and it's been so kind of like active and awesome. And so I think that it's been great to be able to spend more time with other entrepreneurs and other people who are founders and really like, you know, commiserating and kind of chatting about like what does it mean to be a founder right now, because it's a really unique experience. And so I think those things have kind of been great. But I've also loved like taking like a 2 to 3 p.m. like run. Like, I don't know if we'll ever get that back, but it's pretty awesome to get to do that right now.
I've been cooking a lot, which I'd never done before, but I've been making all sorts of crazy stuff: miso, black cod, and beef short ribs, and chicken parmesan. And last night I made potato chips, like for real. Like I took a potato and did you know that if you slice potato really thin, you can actually make potato chips? Who knew you could make potato chips? I did not know that, but I did it. You know, I guess on a slightly more serious note, I think the other biggest change has been just a much deeper appreciation for sort of those in the invisible service part of the economy, the, you know, delivery people and the garbage man and the, you know, the bus drivers and grocery workers and obviously teachers. I mean, I watch my 3 kids doing online learning all day, and I have a newfound appreciation for how difficult it is to be a teacher. So that's been one of the big changes coming out of this.
Awesome. Well said. Well, thank you, Spencer. Thank you, Cami. Thank you, Claire. Amazing afternoon. And thank you, audience, for all those great questions. We will see anyone that's interested back here 2 weeks from today with another great Crosscut conversation.